Daley. My pronouns are they or she. And my title of my project is Embodied Consent, Embodied Psychotherapy Approach to Sexual Wellness, which sounds fancy, but basically means how can we use consent to make sex better. My paper presents a fuller model of consent. The presentation is going to focus on the ways that the body is most directly involved in that. Right? So I'll be covering how desires and boundaries exist in the body, how we can use that to have consent be not just about ethics, but actually a tool for enjoyment, and how we can involve the body in communicating consent. So first, let's talk about this word embodiment. Right? I have a body. Doesn't that make me embodied? By some definitions, yes, but the way we use it in body psychotherapy, embodiment typically means bringing present moment awareness to sensations and movement, including muscle tension, posture, nervous system activity, anything at all happening in the body, just really being present in that experience. One of the reasons we do this is because we find that our bodies actually hold information, especially about our subjective experiences. And in body psychotherapy, we believe that all of the ways of knowing that evolved before our frontal lobes still exist in our bodies and in our brains. And if we bring those ways of knowing into awareness, we can actually live more fully. Another way of thinking of this is shifting from having an experience of your body to having an experience as your body. Now, to access the information our bodies hold, we need qualities of curiosity, non-judgment. If you're like me, you might like to understand things quickly so you can control them with your mind. But to really embody embodiment means listening to the body in its own language, which largely is around sensations and movement. Lastly, embodiment can refer to the ways things manifest in our bodies. So we embody social norms, we embody emotions, patterns based on past experiences. Bringing embodiment to the topic of consent, I have 3 broad topics to cover. So what consent is, why it matters, and how to communicate consent. So starting with what consent is. With increased awareness of sexual assault, there's been a push for explicit verbal communication around consent, sort of eliminate those gray areas of whether consent happened or not. But sometimes people say this feels kind of like signing a contract, like you need to know ahead of time exactly what everybody's going to do, and that makes an interaction considerably less sexy. Right? It prevents things from just unfolding organically. And while there are definitely sexy ways of using words, I'm interested in how consent is actually about feelings even before it's a decision, and how we can actually look at consent as arising from the body. So to get a taste of this, I have a very short solo exercise for anybody who would like to participate. It'll involve a brief guided visualization and body scan, just to learn what yes and no feel like in your body. We won't debrief it because I only have 20 minutes, so this will be completely private. It will be much faster than I would normally lead, but it'll lay some groundwork that we can refer back to. So if you'd like to try, I invite you to just feel the chair or the floor underneath you. Maybe if you're comfortable closing your eyes or softening your gaze, whatever helps you feel what's happening in your body. You just start to notice where your breath is. Don't need to change anything, just notice how your muscles are doing. And then keeping it mild, knowing that you're here at a presentation, bring to mind something that would be a little bit uncomfortable, something that you know you wouldn't like. Maybe talking to somebody you don't like, getting a tooth drilled, sound of your alarm clock. And then notice what happens in your body. Where do you feel tension, relaxation, any small movements? Feeling any changes in temperature or other sensations? Again, we're doing this quickly, so just take a few more seconds to notice what you notice here. And then shake that one off, into your reset, and then move into the positive. So now imagine something that you would like. Anything at all. Like food, touch, sunshine. How do you know that you want this? What changes do you notice in your body? Again, checking with tension, sensations throughout the body, any subtle movements. Just take a few more seconds here. And then again, noticing your chair or the floor underneath you, you wiggle your fingers and toes, move your shoulders, bring your attention back to the room here. So again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to have you share what you found. But with the first one, something that you don't want, many people find sensations like pulling away or pushing away, maybe closing off or tensing. And with something that they do want, more feelings of openness, maybe moving toward, relaxing, taking in. Now, which of those sounds more conducive to pleasure and connection? For most people, the open, relaxed states. Right? You may have also noticed changes in your nervous system, like your breath rate or heart rate. You might see somebody's pupils dilate. Those kinds of reactions can happen under both excitement and fear. So these somatic cues that I'm talking about, like leaning in or turning away, can really help us distinguish what's happening. So that's yes and no in the body. Right? Yes and no in consent have a slightly different history. Who's heard these taglines? Maybe you've seen them on pins or t-shirts. So by and large, there are two frameworks out there for consent. Right? I call these the negative model and the affirmative model. In the negative model, and no means no, this taglines came about in response to broader awareness about how widespread sexual assault and harassment are. And it basically says you have to respect no. Right? No doesn't mean try harder, it doesn't mean convince me, it means no. Right? So this is really crucial, but it also has some problems. Right? In order for this model to work, everybody has to be equally capable of saying no. And that's just not true. Right? Depending on our experiences with trauma or marginalization, there are lots of reasons that people don't actually have access to a full no. Particularly in a situation where you need it, it's possible that there's some kind of trauma response happening that actually has a person in a freeze where the no just isn't accessible. This model also puts a really thin line between consensual sex and sexual assault, and I think it can create some fear around sex. Right? So either of being a victim of sexual assault or being accused of sexual assault. In the yes model, or affirmative consent, basically you only do the things that you've gotten a yes for. Right? This is where that sort of contract feeling can come in, but it does solve some problems of the no model. Right? It asks what your partner really wants and what you really want. It gives the opportunity to start to find the areas of overlap and create really positive experiences. Now, again, experiences of marginalization can also impact our ability to know what we want. So this doesn't solve everything, but it takes some important steps forward. And of course, these aren't entirely mutually exclusive. Right? Even if you're orienting toward desire, we still need to respect it now. But coming back to the body, what did we just discover about yes and no? Generally, yes creates more openness in the body, which can translate into greater flow of energy and creativity, more ability to feel pleasure, and an easier time tracking changes and noticing new desires. So we'll come back to these. First, I want to give you a model for understanding sexual arousal that will also help us think about yes and no. So this is getting into why consent matters. Again, there are obvious ethical reasons, but I'm looking at how we can use consent to make sex better. So for that, I want to tell you very briefly about the dual control model of sexual arousal. Jansen and Bancroft proposed that sexual arousal is not just an on-off switch or even a spectrum ranging from off to on, but that, like so many things in the nervous system, like Shana just told us about, there's actually two independent systems, right? One that excites and one that inhibits. Basically, these systems are your turn-ons and turn-offs. In her book, Come As You Are, Emily Nagoski compared them to the accelerator and brake in a car. And everyone has different levels of sensitivity to excitation and inhibition. For the purposes of overlaying consent on this, I'm just going to focus on how they're activated, regardless of your levels of sensitivity. So something that's important about this is that we don't really get to choose our exciters or inhibitors, and often they're not directly sexual. For both, context is often more important than any specific acts. For example, for most people, though not all, stress and fear are inhibitors, whereas being in a situation where sex has happened before might be an exciter, right? Because our brains are masters of association. Whatever your particular exciters are, for purposes of consent, those are largely what I'm referring to as desires. And then I think of boundaries as connected to the inhibition system over here. And conventional thinking about consent, like in the no means no model, would say that's because when an inhibitor comes up, it tells you you've reached a boundary. Maybe you need to enforce a boundary. And sometimes that's true, but I think we can also set up boundaries intended to promote arousal by actually protecting us from the inhibitory responses. So let's take a look at how that works. So I think the more common understanding of boundaries is being about what you don't want and what you're unwilling to do. But that definition, especially in combination with the negative model of consent, asks us essentially to be on the lookout for threats. When we're on the lookout for threats, it creates fear states in our body. It creates more of these closed off sort of inhibitory responses. And those are good reactions to have if you actually don't want to be having an interaction. But I'm concerned that if consent is about looking out for things that we don't want, it could actually produce these inhibitory responses even when we actually do want to be having sex. On the other hand, if we think about boundaries as encouraging arousal by creating and protecting space for arousal to happen, then we can orient our consent practices more toward desire. And we can focus on our hopes for an interaction rather than our fears about it. Orienting toward desire not only gets us to the acts that we want to do, but it actually helps create those body states so we can enjoy the things that we do. A couple of important shifts around redefining boundaries this way are that it helps move us from a transactional or goal-oriented mentality around sex, where somebody else's boundaries might get in the way of getting what we want, to a more collaborative effort to create really positive experiences. And it also helps shift us away from experiencing no as a rejection to experiencing it as sort of guidance to keeping us on track toward a really mutually enjoyable experience. So, like I said before, the push for affirmative consent has often come with a push for verbal communication. When it comes to communicating consent, words are certainly useful, but studies of sexual communication indicate that people actually really commonly use nonverbal consent, and they view this as a totally valid way to communicate in their relationships. Now, I'm certainly not saying to get rid of words. Right? Words can help us ask about or express desire in ways that nonverbals can't. They can help us express boundaries and desires ahead of time to help set up that frame of safety that allows those more open body states. But words can be legitimately hard to come by when arousal is hard because of what's happening neurologically. And nonverbal communication is useful for things that words aren't so good at. And it's happening all the time anyway, right? So I think it's important to pay attention to it and actually use it on purpose. I also want to acknowledge that there is a naturalness to bodies flowing together that can become really stilted when we try to run it through our cognitive circuits. For every interaction, we just need to make sure that we do it in ways that are really promoting enjoyment for everybody involved and not recapitulating in unwanted power dynamics. So to drive this home, imagine that you're touching somebody and they are saying, yeah, that feels good. I want you to keep going. Why are you laughing? Your verbal communication. I'm going to guess that you attune to my body language and you notice the incongruence between my verbal and nonverbal communication. In Embodied Psychotherapy, we talk about ways to practice attunement. Most people have some innate capacity for this. This is how infants attach to caregivers and learn to regulate themselves. But it's also learnable in various ways. We can practice attunement to actually get a sense of what another person might be feeling by maybe matching their breath rate or their pacing of movement or speech, by, say, like mirroring their posture or their muscle tone. And we never know exactly what another person is experiencing, but this can give us a good taste as sort of a launching point for our curiosity. And one thing that we watch for as we attune is congruence between the different modes of communication. And even as I'm encouraging you to pay attention to desire in consent, we still need to pay attention to any form of no or uncertainty wherever it shows up. On the flip side, that hell yes is when there is congruence between multiple systems. Now, anytime we talk about communication styles, it's important to acknowledge differences due to culture, family background, neurodiversity, which refers to things like autism or ADHD. All of these will affect how a person expresses, interprets, and feels about both verbal and nonverbal cues, as well as what they're inclined or even able to pay attention to. The good news is that we can talk about it. There's no one right way to communicate. There's just what works for any given set of individuals. And through conversation and feedback, we can get better at attuning to each other and making accurate interpretations. So, in summary, of course consent matters because of ethics, respecting bodily autonomy, not committing sexual assault. But I think it's problematic to only talk about consent in terms of what we don't want. Consent is about saying yes, kind of things that really excite me. When consent is too focused on boundaries, it puts consensual sex right up against the definition of sexual assault, and it may create body states that interfere with arousal and connection. I think if we practice consent well, by focusing on desires and what our bodies really want and need for connection and pleasure, we can move these definitions apart and create really positive interactions for everybody. So for that, I want to thank Melissa, who's been my reader for my master's paper, Carla and Mike have helped the class in so many ways. Fuzzy has been my collaborator on a lot of this material, really helping me come up with a lot of the ideas here and even more in the paper. Necessary image attributions and references. Email addresses here if you have questions later, if you want to read the paper. We have 5 minutes for questions.
I'm sorry. How I understand what you're saying about verbal consent, so it can bring you out of the moment, sort of. But I'm wondering what you would say, about without verbal consent, how you can be sure that someone really is consenting.
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think that verbal communication is more important the newer the partner is, and that as you get to know somebody, as you have the opportunity to have those conversations about your communication styles, that you can establish norms of communication, and also just have practice attuning to somebody and getting the feedback, finding out if you're doing it accurately. So I think the verbal is way more important when the relationship is new. And words are always available. Right? So don't take this to mean like use nonverbals and not words. Right? Words are always available. It's just important to acknowledge that the body also has a role. Any questions?
What's next for where you want to take this material or your research or what's of interest about what you discovered?
Yeah, so one of the clearest directions that I have right now, Fuzzy and I have actually been teaching some consent workshops that have been really well received. So definitely plan to do more of those and hoping that they can take off. I'm interested in potentially developing some consent curriculum that's more desire-oriented. I think having a desire-oriented frame is really useful, and just all the fear that's around sex right now, around the Me Too movement. Like, there's so many important things happening, but I just really think this can't be where we land. And so I want to really help move people forward.
Can you imagine doing this in an adolescent setting?
Yeah, I actually teach high school sex ed class right now, and I love talking about this with people of different ages. And I also think that consent education kicks in way young. Right? That consent is not just about sex. think some of the most harmful things we do around consent education are requiring children to hug their relatives or tickling after a child says stop, right? I think that teaching bodily autonomy starts, people are always sexual beings, but starts way before we start expecting sexual activity.
Thank you.